The business card order entry system has been a big hit in the facilities area and really throughout the business because it does exactly what it should do. It allows users to easily provide information so that they can get what they need out of a system without a lot of additional human intervention. So instead of getting a lot of scraps of paper and phone calls and even emails that then required the folks in facilities to use copy and paste to order the business cards, now everything's coming into a system. It's readily available in a SharePoint site. Now the folks in facilities would like to extend this just a little bit more. What they'd like to do is to be able to provide additional feedback to people, because what they're finding is 4 or 5 days in, people are picking up the phone or emailing and saying, are those cards really going to be done on time? So a progress report, always a good thing to put in a workflow. And the second thing is they'd like to actually be able to know when stuff was done. That's not something that we were told to collect to begin with. So I've added 2 more fields to the form. The first, a time and date stamp for when printing was actually done. And the second, a time and date stamp for when someone was notified. In terms of the printing, we'll need to have a human being provide that information, and you'll see how to do that in a later movie. The notification we'll provide automatically, because when we send out the email, it's easy for us to set a value for a field in the current item. There's another really good reason that the business wants to collect this information, because once we have times and dates that show when a process was started, a midpoint, for example, when printing was done, and when it was complete, when someone was notified, we're collecting key performance indicators about the efficacy of our printing operation. So we can accumulate lots of data easily about printing and find out, does it really take 7 days? Why does it take 7 days? Is there additional time that's needed? Whether we're sending things out to a vendor or we have an internal printing group, it's nice for us to just have easy information that we can use to say, are they getting better or worse at what they're doing? Is it taking more or less time for them to provide business cards? So why not collect this data? Again, you'll see that I could have a checkbox here that says printed, check, notified, check, but I don't. I'm using a time and date stamp because that's the only way that we can have this kind of performance information. I'm going to go ahead and close this form, and we're going to head over to SharePoint Designer to see how we can calculate these intervals to be able to grab indicator data about our business. Here we are in our SharePoint workflow for order business cards, and you'll notice that I have already added a couple of additional steps for when we're going to complete printing and when we've sent the notification. I have a couple of questions. How are we going to get completion information from the printer? Is there any lag time needed for shipping? Is it possible, for example, that we're sending some things out to be shipped? Is shipping a different, separate process? So if something's printed today, it won't go out today, it won't go out until tomorrow. So I need to know those things. But that's not what we're really worried about right now. Right now what we're concerned with is how are we going to calculate the time between when an order was submitted and when the order was actually completed. Now both of those fields are date fields, but if we subtract one date from another, the answer in SharePoint is always going to be a number rather than another date. And if you think about it, that's how it works in Excel and Access and other programs too. If I subtract today from tomorrow, the number will be 1 day or 24 hours. It won't be another date. So we're going to create a couple of local variables. The first local variable we're going to create will be from the time the item was submitted to the time it was printed. So submit to print, and again, not a date time, but actually a number. And then I want to add another local variable that is for submit to finish. And again, subtracting one date from another, the answer is not a date, but a number. So 2 new workflow local variables. Let's go ahead and say OK. And now let's see how we're going to calculate the interval between the time this was submitted and the time that it was actually completed. We're going to put it right down here before order completed because that's where it belongs. And let's go ahead and add an action. And the action that we're going to add is way down at the bottom of the list. It's a utility action called find the interval between dates. When it's first stubbed in, it says find minutes between date and output to a variable called time. Well, I already know that my variable here is called submit to finish. And I don't think I want to use minutes. I'm going to come up with a really big number there. Minutes feels too granular. Days feels not granular enough. I'm going to choose hours. So I'm going to calculate the number of hours between, in the current item, first when this item was dropped off or created, right there. It's a date time field, and I want to check that if I'm doing interval here. And then find the hours between that and the date that we don't necessarily have yet, but we will. That is the date that we actually notified the user that this was done. So there's our completion date. Date time field, yes. So find the hours between the time this item was initially submitted and the time that the user was notified, which we're going to do in the prior step right here, and output that to submit to finish. So we're going to have a great number here. The last thing we're going to need to do is find a place to put this because we're at the end of our workflow. So remember that a local variable that we don't do anything with before the workflow ends gets disposed of. So I'm going to add another comment here so that I don't forget that what I need to do is I need to report submit to finish so I don't forget to do something with that variable. I'm not quite sure yet what we want to do with it, but I know that we want to calculate it and we don't want to lose it. We could write it back to a column on this list that we haven't added yet, or we could use this to set a value in a column in another list. We'll decide that as we continue with our workflow and have a few more conversations with our users and with the business about how they would like to have this information reported.